So, good morning, everyone. Welcome at the 12th webinar that we're giving. All for 2 weeks now, we're organizing webinars every day, and all the webinars are about working from home. But also, we have a couple of webinars about Power Apps and Power Automate and Power Platform. There was requested to have a deep dive in the Power Apps, what you can do with it, how it works, and how you configure it. So for this, I've asked Daniel McPherson, our CTO and co-founder of Rapid Circle, and he's doing a lot of with Power Automate. Daniel, can you introduce yourself for a little bit?
I sure can. So good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel McPherson. I'm the CTO, one of the co-founders at Rapid Circle. For the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of things for Rapid Circle on the Power Platform.
Yes, and you're going to show us today how what you've done and how that works, right?
Look, just some of what I've done, Freerk. There's a lot of stuff there, so I can't show it all in 30 minutes. All right, it's an accumulation of 2 years of hard blood, sweat, and tears. So this is just a small slice on the top of all.
We're getting the highlights.
Just the highlights. It's just the highlights package. Yeah,
wow,
exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So for everyone who's joining, some of them are new and some of them are coming more often. We're a Rapid Circle. We help organizations moving to the cloud, Microsoft Cloud, so Office 365 and AMS, Azure. And we do that for a lot of different companies. And if you have any question during this presentation, please feel free to chat in the box right of the screen, and we will pick the questions up or via text, or I will ask them to Daniel so he can come back in it in his story. I will upload the PowerPoint presentation of Daniel in the handout section. That's in the upper right corner, so there you can download it. Yeah, I will do that in a few seconds. If there are no questions at this moment, Daniel, take it away.
Great. Okay, thanks very much, Freerk. A couple of things, I think. One is that I'm obviously speaking in English. I'm an Australian, and unfortunately Dutch hasn't really stuck for me. So if you find that I'm talking a little bit too fast, as I tend to do towards the end of my presentations when time's running out, then please feel free to make a little note in the chat window just to ask me to slow down. That's totally fine. Also, I haven't spent a lot of time coming up with this amazing PowerPoint deck. It's a technical session, and I think it's better if I just sort of take it in the direction you want to go. So I've certainly got some nice things to show you, but if you've got any particular areas of what I show you you'd like to dig into in a little more detail, then again, just jump on that chat window on the right-hand side, and we can take this anywhere you want to go. To give you a bit more background on I'm a developer by heart. So before Rapid Circle, I spent 10 years working at Microsoft, mostly in Microsoft consulting. And I spent a lot of my career building solutions on top of SharePoint, which is a great place for a developer for a developer who's not perhaps as I don't really consider myself an in-depth hardcore developer. So SharePoint is a nice middle ground where you can do some really nice like solutions without having to be a hardcore developer necessarily, although there are lots of really good hardcore developers on SharePoint, so don't get me wrong. And I think that's also why, for me, the Power Platform has been a really fantastic evolution. So I think I've gone now from sort of getting my endorphin rush from writing C# code to getting that same rush from building Microsoft flows, or what they're now called, and using the Power App platform. So I think that's sort of the first thing for me to say is that I'm a total convert. I'm someone that has got a C# and hard, a depth development background, not hardcore. I just said I'm not hardcore. And I've been able to take, I think, a lot of those skills that I had from writing C# code and bring that to my platform. So what you see a little bit later on are some of the things that I sort of used to rely on, like design patterns. Patterns that I've come up with and put them onto the Power Automate or the Flow platform to make better and more governable flows. So I think that's the first thing to say is I'm really super enthusiastic about everything this Power Platform does. And I think even as a developer, it's been a fantastic place to sort of spend some time and build solutions faster than I could before. So there's one thing that I think you all should know about me before we move forward, and that is that I actually like this Power Platform so much that I named my first daughter after it. So what you see on the screen there is my daughter Flo, and she is 6 years old. And I have introduced her to Flow, although conceptually she's still struggling a little bit with some of the concepts. But I hope in the future she becomes a hardcore Flow developer. Her full name is Florence, of course, so she's not named after Flow. But look, it's a nice, gentle way to the presentation. So for me, my sort of journey on Flow really started with governance at Rapid Circle. And it started with a need for me to do some integrations with Exact, and Exact is our finance system. And so I'm sort of my journey and how I got to doing in-depth things with Power Automate and Flow. But at the point that I realized I needed to do some integrations with Exact, I sort of had two pathways. I could go and spin up my Visual Studio and start writing C# code and doing all the sort of integration that I did throughout my career. Or I could start to dig into Microsoft Flow and see what Microsoft Flow could do to make the integrations I wanted to do more lightweight and more declarative rather than written inside of code. So what I discovered is that Exact had a really good set of APIs. So there are a stack of REST-based APIs giving JSON responses. And it was all available for me to go and use. So the first sort of challenge and the first interesting thing I was able to do with Flow was I was able to bring in Microsoft Exact into the Flow environment. And I thought that might be a nice place to start, is just jump right in and take you through how you can integrate a solution like Exact into Microsoft Power Automate. So here we go. I don't know how many people. Maybe just I don't know. You can do a show of hands or anything here. Are people familiar with coding and REST APIs and all those sorts of things? I don't know if I can get any sort of feedback on that, Freerk, or whether I just have to keep going.
Can you place yes or no in the or a little bit in the chat comment? Okay,
there's a no. This is exciting. There's a no.
No.
Okay, there's a lot of no's. No. Okay, all right, awesome. That's great, excellent. There's a yes. Hugo, thank you.
A bit.
All right, great. So what I'll do then, I'll try and sort of step you through. I'll try and sort of demystify APIs, because I think if you're not a developer and you come across this thing called an API, you instantly it becomes a bit of a barrier to you, and you instantly put up this barrier and go, oh, hang on, I'm not a developer, I can't do this API thing. APIs today are ridiculously accessible. They're really, really easy things to work with. And I think that if you are serious about building things in Power Apps and building things in Flow and Power Automate, then it's incredibly important that you understand how to call REST APIs and understand what JSON is, because both of those platforms are really intrinsically connected to those concepts, REST and JSON. So hopefully what I might do is I'll step through it very, very slowly and just demystify this whole API concept, because actually it's very, very similar to when you type in a URL in a browser and you press enter and you get a web page back. All an API is exactly that interaction. Only instead of focused on a UI, it's focused on the data. That's really the only difference. So what I've got here is a list of all these Exact APIs, and already from just a quick glance, this looks pretty overwhelming, okay? Because you've got a stack of different things here. So one thing I've had to do over the last couple of years is become a bit of an Exact expert. I've had to understand how the data is stored inside of Exact, which is no mean feat, by the way. But sometimes it's easy. So let's say, for example, we want to just get a list of people, employees that are registered inside of Exact. So what I can do here is just do a search for employees and...
Are you want to share your screen?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm going to share my screen. Thank you, Freerk. Sorry, guys, let me just share my screen. Okay, sharing the screen.
And this tool that we're using is very good, but in sharing screens, it's sometimes it's a little bit blurry. So what you can do for the viewers is in the top of the screen you see two arrows pointing out of each other, like this. And if you do that, then your screen is getting bigger, and there's an arrow towards a wall. If you click on that, then you hide the chat box. Then probably the screen will be bigger, and then it's easier to see the screen of Daniel. And so, Daniel, I think it's best if we close down our webcam, so that's better rate.
Sure. So I've turned that off. I'm trying to share my screen here, Freerk, and it's not letting me share my screen. Is that? I click on share your entire computer screen or individual window, and I'm not getting a pop-up. Just trying to think what I should do here.
A couple of minutes ago, it worked.
It worked just a second ago, yeah. Hang on 1 second. Okay. Well, that's not helpful. Let me just. I'm going to refresh the screen.
Okay,
maybe that's.
Yeah, refresh your screen for a second.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. This is me. There's Daniel again.
All right, now I've got it back. Okay. You can see the screen, folks.
Perfect.
Have you got it, Freerk?
Yes, I can see your screen. Can I get a reaction if other people also can see it? Okay. It's a little bit blurry, but I think everyone can understand what you see there.
Great. Okay. So what you're seeing here is the documentation from Exact on all their APIs, and it can look very overwhelming when you first see it. But what I mentioned is what we'd like to do is just get back information on employees that are stored inside of Exact. So what you might want to do is just type in search and look for employees, and wouldn't you know it, there's an API down here which is called employees. So if we have a closer look at that, then what we see is there's a whole lot of information here about how this API works. Now, don't get too concerned with what's on here. I think the key things to keep in mind is that there's a URL, and this is a URL just like you would if you were entering in a URL to go to Microsoft homepage or whatever else. An API is simply a URL. And then on that URL, you can do things like filter the content and choose what sort of data you'd like to get returned. So if you want to filter the content, you pass in a filter. And if you want to determine what data comes back, then you enter in select. And it's really that simple. In this case, we're doing a get, which means you're just doing a read-only request. You're not actually posting data back to the system. So this is useful. What you can then do is get a tool like this one over here. Another one which is famous is called Postman. And this tool is like a browser for APIs. It's a very quick and easy, simple tool to help you test out and become familiar with your APIs. So what I've got up here is my browser address bar, for example, and I've pasted in the URL that I've gotten back from that API page. So there it says employees. And down here, I've got the select query. And here I've got a particular filter. And then all I need to do is click on the refresh button, and that's going to make a query dynamically right out to Exact. And then it's given me the response over here from Exact. And this is a response format in what's called JSON. And so JSON is just a very simple format for representing data. And even if you're not familiar with concepts like XML or whatever else, I think it pretty much explains itself. You've got your business email, you've got your country, your email, and whatever else. So this is now proven out that I can call an API from Exact and I can get my JSON back, and we're up and running. This is now proven that we can get data out of Exact. So moving right along, what you can then do with Flow is I can come over here and I can create what's called a custom connector. So just going back into here on the left-hand side, you can see there's this custom connector section. I've got a custom connector called Exact Online. And if I edit that and go to my definition, then what you see is I've baked in a whole lot of APIs over here from exact, like return employees from exact. And if you look down here, it's exactly what I just did a moment ago. I've got the URL from exact, I've got the select, I've got the filter, and from that, I get my response back in JSON format. Now, all of this takes about 2 hours, I'd say, from start to finish. The first time you need to create a connection to exact. And then after that, creating a new connection or a new API in exact takes only just a matter of minutes. So whenever you come across a need to add a new type of connector in exact, it takes about 2 minutes to go and get that running. So very quick and easy. And once you've done that, then what happens is inside of your flows, you have all the capabilities of exact exposed as actions, and you can start to use them and consume them inside of your flows and build solutions that integrate with Microsoft, with Exact Online. So I'm going to pause there and just see if there's any questions or if there's any detail people would like me to go into. But we've started off quite technical, so from here it gets a bit less technical.
Is there anyone who has a question about this? Nope.
All
Okay,
right.
then we can go further.
So I'll just show you what the result is. I'm over here and inside of a flow that I've created. And what I can do now is type in exact. And there's my exacted line, custom connector. And here are all the APIs that I've gone and created and exposed inside of exact. So I think the key takeaway I want to make here is that Microsoft Flow or Power Automate, Microsoft Power Automate is a great platform for connecting systems. And you don't just have to rely on the systems that Microsoft provides out of the box for you to connect to. You can connect to almost any other system that has a REST API that gives you JSON responses. And once you realize that and can get new connectors up and running very quickly, the sky's the limit as far as the sort of integrations that you can do with Flow and with Power Automate. So what I've done now with this is I've really made Exact available to anyone who wants to build custom automations inside the organization, as if it were an out-of-the-box connector provided by Microsoft. So it's really powerful stuff. So with that, I'm just going to duck back to my PowerPoint presentation. And give you a quick glimpse. This is some of the integrations that I've done across Rapid Circle. So I started off very slowly, and right now we've got about 200 to 250 individual Power Automate flows that are integrating systems across the entire business. And these are things that integrate with Exact, they integrate with Hub Planner, which is our planning tool, with Teams, with Excel in Office 365, with Dynamics, a lot of different things we've done. And it's just been this gradual improvement over time that has led to a real reduction in what I consider busy work across the business. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Hub Planner is the tool that we use to plan the consultant's time on projects. And so what we would find is that if a project was extended, then what people would have to do in the business is they'd have to go into Exact and they'd have to type in an end date for the project and then go into Hub Planner and plan the people out to the further end of the project. So they'd plan them out a couple more weeks in advance. So what we thought would be nice is, wouldn't it be great, is if the project managers just focus on planning their people inside of Hub Planner, and then if the project end date was extended in Hub Planner because people were planned, let's just automatically go back into Exact and change the end date. And that became possible, so that's what we did. Another example was, wouldn't it be good if I added someone in Hub Planner to a project and then that automatically added them as an employee restriction Exact so they could write time on that project? And then wouldn't it be great if we also went into Teams and automatically added them as a member for that client inside of the client team? And so by a project manager simply planning someone in Hub Planner, we automatically allow them to write time and we automatically give them access to the right team inside of Teams. And all of these things just start to build on top of each other over time. And so Flow becomes this, this little tool for making small productivity wins across the business. And when you add up all of those small productivity wins across the business, you end up saving a lot of time and increasing productivity. And the other thing is people never like doing this work. They don't do it well because they forget to update one system when they update the other. and it's just boring, mundane, administrative work. So Power Automate and Flow at Rapid Circle has really enabled us to streamline the integration across all of these different systems. One thing I'll mention, just briefly, the way that I've done and managed a lot of these integrations is by creating a mini data warehouse. So basically, I have a list inside of SharePoint, yes, because I'm a SharePoint guy. So I have a list inside of SharePoint, which we call the clients list. And what I do on the clients list is I bring in all the information about a client from Hub Planner. I bring in all the information from Exact about clients. I bring in all the information from Dynamics about the client, and I unite it together inside of this single client list inside of SharePoint. And then that becomes the dictionary, if you like, for me to work out how I can do all these different integrations. And it's a place where I know I've got all the information I need about a client, you know, regardless of whether that information comes from Exact or from Dynamics or from Hub Planner. Now, I did that before. I think a lot of these, some new technologies emerged around the CDS, which has really matured a lot over the last year, and also the CDM. So I think if you are looking to do integration of systems inside your organization, I'd really encourage you to look at the CDS, which is this database system based around entities, which came out of the Dynamics toolset, and which is a great place for you to store information about all the different entities in your organization, like clients or projects or people. And then also dig into what's called the CDM, which is the common data model. And the common data model is an attempt by Microsoft and other vendors to create like a canonical definition of a person, or a canonical definition of a client, or of an account. So basically what you would do is not invent your own definition of what sort of fields go on an account, but you will use the one that Microsoft has defined for you. And in doing that, you should be able to streamline integration with other systems later, because they will also provide support or even directly create their entities based on the CDM definition. So yeah, if you're looking at doing integration across the systems, take a look at CDS, take a look at CDM, which is out there on GitHub. So we've got a couple of patterns here to show you. So the first one here is a sync pattern. What you'll probably find is that you want to be able to synchronize from one system into another. And to be clear, I'm only doing a one-way sync here, so it's not a two-way sync. But it looks on the surface to be quite a simple thing to do. You want to take, for example, all the clients from Exact and synchronize them over into a SharePoint list. So I'm going to share my screen again and show you what I've found is a really useful pattern for doing a synchronization.
I've uploaded the link to the chat, so everyone can follow that if they want.
Thank you, Fred. So what I've got here is a flow that I've created which synchronizes all of the timesheet entries from Exact into a SharePoint list. So the first thing here is I do it on a recurrence. So every 2 o'clock every morning, I go and run this particular job. I work out what the current time is, and then I go back in time 4 days. So here's a tip. When you're building your flows, what you should do is basically assume that the connection between your systems is going to fail. So these systems are sort of loosely coupled. They rely on authentication to be in place. They rely on the systems to be up and running and not have any downtime. And so if you build your flows on the assumption that everything is always going to work, then what you're going to have is a situation where every now and then you're going to have to go and take manual steps to repair them. And so a better mindset going into building your flows is to just assume that every now and then your flows are going to fail. And if you assume that and you build them with that assumption in place, then your flows will be self-repairing. So as you'll see a little bit later on, what I essentially do is every time I run, I synchronize timesheets from the past 4 days. Now, I don't really need to do that. I could just synchronize the timesheets from the last time the flow ran. But by doing it for the last 4 days, I make sure that if the flow doesn't run on one particular day, then that's fine. When it runs the following day, it'll catch up all of the different days that it missed by not running the day before. So it's got some self-repairing built into it. I then set up a whole series of variables, and these variables help me for logging. So they track how many times I loop through the results that are coming back from Exact. I do a count of the total number, that I've processed, how many I've added, how many modified, and how many were skipped. I then go and grab a list of all the employees from my SharePoint list. I create what's called a skip token. I track my paging, and I've got an error.
What's a skip token?
Yeah, so one thing you'll find is that when you're calling these APIs, they will all have limits on them. So when you call an exact API, the largest response you can get back from that API is 60 records. So if you expect routinely to receive more than 60 records back from a query you make to an API, and you don't have some sort of paging in place, then you're going to be missing results. And that's a real trap because you don't necessarily know that you're missing the results. You've called the API, you've got the results back, you've processed them, but what you don't realize is it wasn't a full set of results that were coming back from exact. So what we need to do is we actually have to do a loop. So I use my skip token, which is a skip token basically is just a code that you pass back to the API to say, I got the first 60, here's my code, that tells you who I am, now give me the next 60. So over here, what I'm doing is looping through all the results I get back from my timesheets API. And what I do is, one thing that's important is that when you're doing these loops, you set up how many loops you want to do. Now, what can be really dangerous is that Microsoft Flow will always do that many loops. So even if on the first time you do it, you've got some error in your API call, unless you've got some sort of error trapping, Flow will continue to call until it's done all of these counts. And that can be a very impolite thing to do to another system. Because basically, if this fails, I'm still going to make 1,000 requests to that system, even though I'm not getting any useful data back. So what I've done is I've made sure that I break out if there's an error by using this parallel. You can run parallel actions inside of Flow. And I can say that on this side, run this section over here if there's an error. And that's over here. You can set this option, configure the run. So I run if it's failed and I run if it's timed out. I don't run this side if it's successful. On this side, I run if it's successful. So you can see there that it says successful. So providing everything works well, it's just going to continue down this left-hand side. If there's a problem, it'll go to the right-hand side. It'll set the error to true, and then my loop will break out because I'm checking to make sure if it's an error. It's really important, otherwise you will make other people unhappy with you. So I get the results back, I then parse the JSON, and then I check if the skip token is empty. If the skip token is empty, that means that I've gotten all the results back from the system. You'll notice up here, by the way, I'm skipping ahead, but over here, here's my filter, and I get the 4 days, the time I created before. I get to make sure that I'm only getting the last 4 days worth of results. Moving down here, I then loop around every single one of the results I get back, and then I check for duplicates. So this is a really important step too. When you get the results back from exact, and you're about to write them away into the destination source, which in this case is SharePoint, what you don't want to do is just create new items for every new item you find, because we've got this 4-day overlap. I'm going to get potentially 3 days of data that I previously had before. So I don't want to just write that in there again. I need to check to see if that item already exists. So I check here to see if it already exists. If it doesn't exist, then I go and create it, and that's great. So I just go and create my entry. If it does exist, then I do another check, and I check to see if the data coming out of exact has been modified after the data that I've already got in my list. And only if it's been modified in exact after the version I've got in my SharePoint list, do I then go and do an update. Now, this is also very important because it's limiting the number of updates I do in my destination system. And it also lets me use features like versioning inside of SharePoint. Because if I'm only changing it when there's been a change, when I look at my version history, it's nice and clean. If I just always went ahead and just didn't update, then what I'll end up with is a whole lot of versions, and most of which don't contain any changes in the source system. So where this has been really handy for us is that exact doesn't really have any versioning features. And by using SharePoint and by using SharePoint versioning and by doing this synchronization, I've actually added features to exact, because now I have this entire version history on any of the exact data that I want, whether that's clients or projects or timesheets or whatever else. So if someone wants to know when someone in the team changed the timesheet, I can't get that information from exact, but because of this integration, I can actually work out when someone changed a particular timesheet, which has been really useful. And then scrolling down here, we go and complete our totals. And then at the end, I write a log away over here. So for me, this pattern has proved to be really robust. It's been running now across, this pattern has been running for a number of different endpoints in Exact, into a number of different lists inside of SharePoint. And so if you are looking to do any integration between two systems inside of Exact, I recommend using this sort of flow to support it. It's a really nice design pattern. So I'm going to move straight on to my next design pattern. And one thing you'll come across when you're doing these sorts of synchronizations between two systems in Flow is that deletes are really difficult to handle, because when it deletes, it's gone. And often these source systems don't tell you that a delete has happened. So you can't really synchronize information based on stuff that isn't given back to you in a response. So whenever you're doing synchronizations and someone's asking you about how hard it is, make sure the first question you ask is, are you synchronizing data that only ever grows? Or are you synchronizing data that also needs to take into account deletes? Now, I'm not going to go in detail on this particular pattern, but the other thing to say about trying to capture deletes in systems that don't provide you with a log of the items that have been deleted is that it ends up being a very heavy duty flow. Because what you essentially have to do is you have to get a list of all the source items, a list of all the destination items, and then you have to compare the two of them together, find out which ones are missing, and then delete them from the destination list. So that inherently is a very, very heavy duty system. So what I typically do with my deletes, which I can share with you, but basically says just get me all my source items, and then process all of my source items and check to see if it's deleted by doing a query with my destination. And then if it finds it, put it into another collection, and at the end just go through and perform all of my deletes. And I run this basically once a week. So what I say to the team is be aware that new stuff will be there almost daily, but if there are deletes that need to be processed, I'm only doing them once a week. And that can mean if you're building, if you're doing these synchronizations for KPIs or things like that, sometimes your KPIs can be out of date. Now, obviously, if you need those KPIs to be up to date every day, then you're just going to have to run this sort of synchronization daily rather than weekly. So the next pattern I want to show you is a logging pattern. So Microsoft Flow doesn't have any built-in sort of concept of logging of what you do within the flows. And so again, I've got another pattern, which is what I use to do all of my logging. So here's a quick example of my of the log list that I have. So basically, I created a list. The list has these sorts of properties on it. So if I go to my list settings, these are the fields that I've created. So it's things like a title, a status, description, whether or not this log should be shared with everyone, what the topic is, if it should be shared to specific teams, if it's shared into what I call my replication tasks feed. ID was, so I capture all of that. And then essentially what I do inside of my flows is if I want to create a log, all I do is I create an item in this. My logging action is nothing more than a SharePoint add list item action inside of my flow. So I added a list item, and that essentially just asks me for all of this information here. So if I click on the new button, it just asks me for this. So I fill in that information in my flow, and then behind the scenes, I have a flow log listener. So it's looking for any new items created in that log list. And based on that, it does some things. So for example, the first one is I've got a channel inside of a team called replication tasks, and that's my verbose logging. So essentially everything I log automatically gets put into this replication tasks channel inside of my Rapid Circle data team. So that gives me my verbose logging. I can then say, look, this log is really interesting. I want to post it to everyone. So then there's an everyone team that we have, and there's a channel called feed. And what I do is I also then post that log into the everyone feed. So that might be something like someone's going on leave or some other sort of announcement. What I can also do is I can include some other channels And so basically I can embed some JSON inside of my description field, and that will then make sure that I automatically post to a particular team. So where this gets quite handy is I might be doing some things in Dynamics. I might be looking for opportunities to get modified. And so when an opportunity is modified for a particular client, then I automatically post something into that client team. And that might say, this opportunity for this client has now been modified to won or lost. And so you sort of, by creating these logs, I'm also creating this ambient communication throughout the organization, which means that when an opportunity gets modified, the client team gets notified, maybe the management team gets notified, the sales team gets notified. I'm making this information move seamlessly throughout the organization using Teams and using this sort of automation. And I can't emphasize enough how powerful this is, because it means you don't have to rely on people telling each other stuff. It's not high value communication, but it's just this keep everyone aligned about what's going on across the business. And we have lots and lots of examples of that sort of ambient communication that goes on. So move on to the next one. Here's an example of an API pattern. And this is a pretty basic pattern, but basically in Flow, you can actually create your own REST APIs. So much like I mentioned before that Exact has a REST API, there are actions and connectors inside of Flow that let you create your own API. And this is one that I created. Basically, you create this sort of trigger, which is a HTTP trigger. In JSON, you define the properties you want to pass in. And once you've passed in those properties in JSON, then you can go and do things inside of your Flow, and you can provide a response at the end of it. So in doing this, you become a web API developer, which is it's just insanely powerful. I can't emphasize enough just how powerful this is. And where it becomes really interesting is it allows you to sort of make flows that are more modular, and then you can improve your reuse across different flows. So a couple of other points I'll make about this. This is also, in my opinion, singly the most powerful enterprise capability for exfiltrating data out of your organization. Okay, so you really need to be careful about how people are using this sort of flow connector, because essentially what it enables me to do is in 5 minutes, I could create an API which is available on the internet with really no authentication that could grab secure information from inside your organization and send it out. Okay,
Wow.
I sound very alarmist when I say this, but that's just the honest truth. If you are letting anyone in your organization create flows with this HTTP connector, you're also letting them expose any secure internal information externally without any further thought.
Is that something that you can prevent? Can you track that kind of activities or something like that?
Yeah, you can, and there's more and more integrations with the DLP features inside of Office 365. It's actually not an area I'm particularly in depth on, although we've had guys in the team that have been working at Shell, and this was a really big issue for Shell, and they did a lot of work on the governance and the rules around how to make sure that you can limit people's access to these sorts of capabilities. I know that initially the sort of levers you had were very immature, but Flow is becoming better and better and better, and including around the governance. And I'd say that probably there are more controls in place now to let you manage this. But really be aware, this is super powerful, but with that power becomes great responsibility, because you are literally creating an anonymous API exposed on the internet. Now there are things called API keys on here, like an API key. So there's like a really long password protecting it, but again, it doesn't stop anyone who wants to exfiltrate data by just passing someone externally that API key, and then away they go. They're getting all the data they want out of your organization.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing I use these APIs for is that there's integration capabilities between Power Apps and Flow. So you can do this out of the box, and you can create a Flow connector for Power Apps. My experience with that connector is pretty mixed. I've found that the issue is that if you make any changes in Power Apps or Flow, the connection breaks and you have to reestablish it. So, it seems that when you use that functionality, the integration is really tightly coupled in that, you can't have any changes on either side, otherwise you've got work to do. So if you can build things inside of an API instead, then you move towards a more loosely coupled system where you can change a Power App, and as long as you're still calling the flow in the same way, the flow is not going to be impacted. And you can change the flow, and as long as the Power App's still calling it the same way, the Power App won't be impacted. So what I actually end up doing to do my integration between Power Apps and Flow is, instead of using the out-of-the-box Flow and Power App connector, I actually create a custom connector, just like I did with Exact, and I use that custom connector to speak between Power Apps and Flow. And in my experience, that's been a fantastic way to do that integration, and it's been rock solid. So I'm super happy with the way we do that. Moving right along, here's another one here called Flow Details. So you don't get a lot of, it's quite hard sometimes to get a good overview of all the flows you've got running in your organization, because when you look at the flow section in flows, it can be quite overwhelming. So what I do is I have a flow which lists all my flows and then writes them away into a flow details list. And the cool thing about a flow details list is that you can actually crack open the JSON that defines the flow, and then you can break it out into columns. So one of the things that I wanted to do is, I'm doing a lot of synchronization jobs with Exact, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't hitting any throttling on Exact. So throttling will happen when you're making too many queries all at the one time with a backend system. It's basically saying, hey, you're being too demanding. I can't serve that many requests. Therefore, I'm going to slow you down. So from the standard Flow UI, you can't see what your various schedules are for when flows are going to trigger. So every night, actually every 15 minutes, I look through all my flows. I crack open the JSON that defines the flow. I look for the schedule action, and I break it out here in this list. So what I can now do with this list is I can look to see, okay, this particular flow here runs every day, once a day, and it runs at 5 o'clock in the morning. Hey, that's really, and what I can do is I can now change my schedules, as you can see, so that I don't have jobs conflicting with each other. My synchronization jobs are done really balanced across the whole evening. And that means I'm a good citizen when it comes to consuming the APIs in Exact. The other thing I do is I track the duration of the flow. And by doing that, I can make sure that none of my flows are getting out of control. And I can work on trying to optimize flows that are taking too long. And as I mentioned earlier, you can see that the delete flows, they are the most demanding ones. And you can see here, they're taking 92 minutes or 46 minutes to run. And I run them once a week for that reason at 9 o'clock on Saturdays and Sundays. So this is really a nice way of getting a better overview of all your flows, and you can break any data you want out of them to display here.
Two questions about this from Hugo.
Sure.
Do you get all the flows or only your own flows? And what about logging flow results to log analytics?
Yeah, good one. So I'm only getting the flows for my accounts, I believe. So if I look here, well, actually for this environment, it's my flows in this particular environment, So it depends on the user that you're logged in as to how that will work. And then, I think, logging to, a more sophisticated logging destination, I'd be all for that. And I think, Rapid Circle is obviously a very small organization, so we can get away with logging just to a SharePoint list. But I think for someone like Dane, Hugo, you'd be better off, working with a more robust logging destination, like Log Analytics Services or something like that.
Okay, perfect. There are also two questions, but they were asked earlier. I don't know if this is a good time or that you first want to show us. Okay, so at your first sync pattern, what you showed, Mark asked, is the pattern reusable? So if you want to create a pattern, then you can reuse it?
Yep, it certainly is reusable. Basically, I could share this template with you. And the key thing is you just need to swap out, if you weren't going to Exact, you were going to some other system, you just need to swap out Exact and swap out SharePoint if you're going to, say, the CDS, and just replace those particular actions. That's what's important about a pattern, is that, basically, if you make sure you do these things, that will translate into, the most robust form of synchronization. It sort of describes a good approach to solving this problem. And that's not to say, by the way, that there aren't things you could do here to improve it, and I hope there is. This is just, after doing this for about 18 months, for me, this has been the best way of doing synchronization across two systems.
And you've created this pattern with all those checks in it. Did you design it yourself, or did you use a template from someone else?
Did it myself.
And how do you, for people who are watching, that maybe they also want to create a flow like this? How do you design a flow that you take care of all the possibilities that can happen? Because of course, when you're creating the flow, you cannot maybe think of all the problems that you can face in the future.
Yep. So I think that's a good question. So I think that the nice thing about flows is that they're very quick to build, and they're easy to fix, and there's lots of capabilities for replaying things when it breaks. So what I'd recommend you do is just build a flow and check that it works, and then let it go, but make sure you monitor it for errors every single day. And anytime you get a failure in that flow for any reason, fix that failure. So it's very much like a Six Sigma or a lean type approach to building these things, in that, get it live quickly, make sure it solves the majority of the problem that you have. Over time, you're going to hit lots of different edge cases that you didn't consider in your upfront design. Every time you hit one of those, make it better. Wait for the next thing you're going to hit, make it better. And the nice thing is, when it breaks and you get this error, then what you can do is go back into the flow. It will tell you exactly why it failed. And then you can click on the replay button, and it will just replay that particular error. And then you can, one, make sure that the fix you made works. And then two, you make sure that the data you are working with is in the state that you want it to be, because it just replayed it successfully. So that's a really important philosophy or mentality you have to have going into building flows. Yeah.
So you don't have to think of all the possibilities up front. You can just create you can start with a simple flow and work on it the next couple of months to make it better and better over time. Exactly.
That's absolutely the mentality to have. Yeah, definitely. Lots of quick wins. This is a platform for quick wins. And I think that can be difficult because you're doing things in production. So you do have to take a lot of care, and I think you have to, that requires experience and maybe some technical background because of that, doing things in production. But if you're careful and you're clear about making sure that the risk of doing something wrong is not too great, then it's a really dynamic and agile platform to work on.
Okay, interesting. And another question, also from Hugo, when do you go from Power Automate to Logic Apps?
Yeah, that's an excellent question again. I don't have a hard and fast answer to that. I think there's definitely an element of governance there. I think Logic Apps are definitely your more governable, more heavyweight system for doing these sorts of integrations. So I think that Rapid Circle can get away with using Flow, but I think, again, if you're a larger organization, then I think you want to think if Logic Apps become the better place for you to be building these sorts of integrations. With that said, there are some things you can't do in apps. So, for example, the approval functionality isn't there in Logic Apps, and a little bit less accessible to people because obviously they have to go into the Azure Blade and do all those sorts of things over there. So I can't draw a hard and fast line, and that's probably because my experience has mostly been at Rapid Circle. So if I was going to start working with directly on this, then I think I'd start to develop a different view on where Logic Apps would fit. Right now I've been doing things in Flow. And it's interesting, there are things that you don't get in Flow as well that you get in Logic Apps. So right now you'll see one of those, and that is that you don't have any version control in Flow, and in Logic Apps you have version control. But interestingly, I was able to also write a flow that creates a backup of my flow inside of a document library. And then if you turn on versioning in your list, then bingo, you've got the ability to back up and version your flows in Microsoft Flow. So it's a nice way of filling some gaps that you might have when you're doing things in Flow versus Logic apps by building additional flows. And so in some cases, this might be a nice solution even in larger organizations for some scenarios.
Yeah, so to summarize, Flow is easier, more end user friendly than Logic apps, and some things Flow can do and Logic apps can't, and the other way around. Yeah. And if I understand you correctly, then everything that you've created so far are all in Flow, Power Automate, and you don't use Logic apps, so you can do a lot of things without Logic apps. Yeah,
correct. Yeah, exactly.
And is it true that you use Logic apps for more difficult things? That it's more for programmers and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, Logic apps is really have enormous amounts of overlap. So anything you do in Flow, you can do in Logic apps. But I think definitely where we've used Logic apps is, Logic apps has become part of for our developer teams. So when they're building custom solutions, we've encouraged them to think about where Logic apps might fit into their architecture to try and reduce the amount of code that they build and make the solution a little bit more configurable. So that's more where I've had experience with Logic apps.
Okay.
So I think we've got 5 minutes left before maybe a bit of Q&A. So just quickly, this is a solution we built, which I'm super happy with. Basically, we had a situation where we wanted to be able to create templates, and that's a problem lots of organizations have. Where's the latest template? What's the latest version? All those sorts of things. So we've got a Power App here where we can host all of our different templates. What I can then do is choose a template, and it does some slight customization of the Power App as far as the properties I fill in. But if I choose a client document, then it asks me to put in a property and a thing. And then it also, because it's a client document, asks me for the client, which I look up to my mini data warehouse in SharePoint and pull back the client and pull back the project. I select that, and then I can store it automatically either in a shared location in the client team or in the project folder, and I can choose a particular graphic. And then I click on the create button, and away it goes. Now, behind the scenes, what's happened is that my Power App has gone and called and so the flow is running over here. And I'll quickly take you through how that works. So I'm just going to do a refresh. In a second, we should see a running flow at the top of this list. Here it comes. And there it is. So my flow is running. And I can open that flow. And now I can see the flow while it's in flight, while it's executing things. So as I mentioned before, I use this API type approach to do my integrations with Power Apps. And the nice thing about doing it this way is that it means that I can actually create a template by just calling a API. So for example, if I was using Dynamics, I could call this API as well from Dynamics and then create my document template. So that's pretty nice. So the HTTP request comes in. Here are all the parameters to my request, things like submit a name, submit an email, etc., etc. I then come down and I get my template definition, which comes from a team that I've got set up, a SharePoint site with a document library. So I get my definition, my template definition. Then I go and get the client information if the client has been specified. Then I get the project information if the project has been specified. I get all the document properties that just got passed in as parameters. And I wrap those properties up into a JSON package. And then I go and create that document. Now, in creating that document, I actually call out to an Azure function. So I still have to write some C# code sometimes. And I won't necessarily go into it, but you wouldn't believe how difficult it was to get a nice solution for replacing certain strings in a template with values. So for example, replacing everywhere you write client with some values. SharePoint has got some of this functionality, but it's got a number of different flaws. There is a word action inside of Flow, which is great, but has all sorts of flaws. So in the end, I've used a little C# library and an Azure function to do the job of replacing inside of a Word template things like the client name or the author or the project name. I then go and save the new document, and I deliver the document into the location where it should be finished up. And in this case, it's saving it into a client site called Client Rapid Circle, and it didn't find the project, so it's just putting it into the shared documents library. And if I go now back to my Teams, what I should have is a new card from Flow telling me that, hey, your document is here ready to go. So I can click on the link. When I click on that, it'll open up my browser, and there's my document all ready to go. So in a second, we'll see the document pop up. So for me, this is a really fantastic example of something that I would have done in the past with lots and lots of C#, but instead I did using just a flow with maybe 30 lines of C# code to use that templating tool that I mentioned before. And it's very, very quick and easy for us to modify if something changes later. If I look up here, you'll see that it's stored in the right place.
Really nice.
Great. So I think, well, that sort of brings us to the end of the session, guys. So I'm not sure if there's any questions or Q&A. Thanks for hanging in there. Pretty technical.
Yeah, I think almost everyone stayed to see you working on this. I saw a link in your PowerPoint presentation. And I shared it with everyone. There was the sync pattern, but of course there was an internal link, so people cannot open it. But can you share something that is? Can you share something with people that is interesting for them to see if they want to work with Power Apps, Power Automate flows?
Sure. What I'll do, it might take me a little bit of time, so maybe give me until the beginning of next week. If you're interested, if you can contact Freerk, then I'll send you back some templates exported from Flow, so you can actually just import those templates yourself and then configure.
That would be nice. So if you are interested in that, please fill in yes in the chat. Then I will get your email address and I will send it to you. Hugo also asked a question: do you have any experience with creating PDF documents from an XML file? Can you recommend a tool?
Not from an XML file anymore. I've got a great experience in doing that from JSON, from a JSON file, and that's exactly what this little template. And I can't tell you how awesome this little templating tool is. It's called templater.net. And it just does this one thing, which is just support replacing tokens in a Word document or a PowerPoint with some JSON you pass in. So it's really, really good. So yeah, not directly with XML. We use Mahimbe to do all of our PDF conversions, and Mahimbe has got support for.
Oh, I don't hear you anymore.
Am I there?
Yeah, I think you're back.
Okay, great.
You were saying something about the tool Mahimbe?
Yeah, so we use Mahimbe, which has got support for Microsoft Flow, and it's really nice support. So for example, we automated our entire invoicing system, which you would not believe, but that was through Exact integration. But basically we automatically create the invoice in Exact. We download the PDF from Exact. We have a template in Excel, which I then map with the timesheets that get exported out of Exact into the Excel spreadsheet for a specification. And then we also support adding additional files, for example, onto a list item. And then I grab all of those together and I run them through, and that gives me one PDF, and then we automatically email that out to the customer. So the invoicing was a great example. Maybe it's for another webinar, but we went from an invoice taking on average down to being literally 3 minutes to produce an invoice. So that was, I can't emphasize enough how nice it was to automate that with Power Automate and Flow and Mahimbe and all that stuff end to end, so that our PMs basically just approve their own invoices and they automatically get sent. It's been insanely good. So yeah, that's where my experience with PDF. If you like, give me a call, Hugo, and I can have a chat more about how we've done some of that, because I've been deep recently.
Okay, Hugo, do you have the number of Daniel? His phone number? Okay. Nope, he says. I will email you can I email your phone number to?
There it is. Anyone call me. If you need to call me or anything, just give me a call. No problem.
Okay.
There it is.
Okay, thanks Mark for joining, and thanks everyone else for joining. If there are no other questions, then I think it's a wrap, as we say that. Thank you everyone for joining, and see you all tomorrow for a new Dutch webinar. And thank you, Daniel, for the good webinar. I think it was very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. It's very hard to do these technical ones, but really appreciate you hanging in there. It was great that you did. So Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye.